Good afternoon and welcome everyone to this second meeting of the Housing Advisory Committee. Looks like we have everyone in attendance today. Ask for a motion for approval of the agenda. Moved by Jeff, seconded by Lorraine. All in favor? Thank you. One thing I think we failed to do the first meeting was appoint a vice chair. So I'm vice chair basically would fill in if I'm unavailable. Could help organize the agendas. Looking for volunteer or someone to nominate a volunteer. And how come now? I also see Kelly's hiding. Sorry, anybody else is hiding from right now? Okay, looking for a nomination for vice chair.
I'll do it if no one wants to. I'll put my name in there.
Great, thanks, Lindsay. We have a seconder. Jeff, Vicky, all in favor? Great, thanks, Lindsay. Appreciate that. Okay, we have no adoption of minutes. I'll ask for disclosure of monetary interest.
Oh, sorry, Sean, that was my bad. There is the adoption of the May 26th meeting minutes. That's my bad. I didn't add that, but I'll defer that approval until the next in case people didn't approve them.
Yeah, I think it's appropriate. Thank you.
Sorry, my apologies.
No worries. So disclosure of monetary interest in today's agenda. See none. So we do two delegations today. Linda Schranter is currently tied up. Landlord and tenant tribunal. She expects to be available by about 2 o'clock. So we'll defer her delegation. And Corey Turnbull, welcome back. You helped guide us along the journey of our housing task force, and it's great to have you back today for the Housing Advisory Committee for a deeper discussion into the review of root cause analysis. So Corey, the floor and screens are all yours.
Great. Well, thank you for having me back in. Hopefully I can help provide some assistance, and we'll kind of review where we left off the last time. Dave, are you able to call up the two PowerPoint presentations that I think you would have received for me? I can take over the screen. What works best?
I've sent all three of the documents to Dave. Corey, do you know the specific name of the one?
Okay.
Does it matter?
So the first one that sorry, I've got my screen up here. The first one is just the housing, kind of a mixture here. Just a second, sorry. Yeah, it just says housing on the top, and it was basically just a scope document. Yeah, perfect. That's great. Okay, so stretches back to just over a year ago. I was brought in to help frame up some of the various topics and discussions that were happening around the table and the team at the time. Lots of good ideas, lots of good discussions. So what I was purposely coming in to do was just kind of frame some of that into a bit of a project format. So from what you're going to see over these next 3 slides basically was just taking some of the meeting minutes from the team at that time, as well as the terms of reference at that time, and creating kind of a project charter out of that, as well as a bit of a to-do list and where we're going to go. After that, there was approximately 2 more meetings that I was part of at that point in time, and we took from a couple of different brainstorming sessions and created basically a list of items and identified some of those items that were in scope and that were priorities, and then some of those items that were too large and out of scope or could possibly have been connected to a few other initiatives that were going on at the time. So once we go through these first 3 slides, we'll flip over to those other slides, and hopefully it'll all make sense in the end. If not, I can certainly help jog memories as needed for that. So when we were looking at the scope, what we had said for this was that we should be clear with definitions of what will be looked at and what wouldn't be looked at. Because in a sense, what we're trying to do with these types of projects is create these walls, the sandbox around the item. It's very easy when we get into discussions such as these particular topics that we get into what we call boiling the ocean, which it gets very, very large very quickly, and the actual work that gets done gets bogged down because we're looking at it. So actions that are not typically within a scope could fall into spin-off projects, for example, or could be put into a parking lot. When we identify an action, though, typically an action is a deliverable that we're looking for an owner on as well as a timeline. So for example, for this particular area, I started with the terms of reference and the scope was looking similar to this. So basically in scope, and the definition of the access to affordable housing basically falling within 4 buckets within our area. So there was affordable housing, there's the homeless, people who did not have access to a shelter now. There was the displaced, people who had been displaced because of development or other issues that are occurring. Then there's the poverty to low income, people who cannot afford shelter because of rising costs. And then there's availability for working families, people who cannot find houses because of the shortage. And even that alone is a fairly broad spectrum and needs to be carefully managed because, again, you could easily start stepping into areas that the project becomes too big. What we wanted to continue looking at was, the current and the projected needs for housing within the municipality. We wanted to look at the existing affordable housing units and developments within the municipality. And just to clarify, some of these things we may already know because, again, this was before at the beginning of the process before. So some of this would have already probably been completed. There was discussions around the Smith Falls official plan and zoning bylaws. There was the municipal government's current approach to increasing access to affordable housing. So what is the town council and the mayor's strategy around that, as well as the administrative staff? There was a high level of urgency and discussion around requiring consultation engagement of the public from all areas. So business, labor, and community groups. And the groups would be the cross section with the lived experiences within this area and the ones that are seeking housing. So this is what your team is made up of. These are the people that have, as we talk, these are the people that come back and say, they're the counterbalance. They're the ones that are saying, look, this is my experience. I hear what you're saying, but this is my experience. And then, of course, any of the potential zoning or bylaw changes that could occur or would potentially be reviewed as a result of some of this. Out of scope, we had identified as solutions to some of the social determinants. The social determinants often such as, some of the health, some of the work situations, things that we can't directly influence necessarily from the housing task force. What we want to do is make sure that we're stay focused on the housing area of it. And then, of course, access to housing outside the municipal government boundaries. So this was very much a Smith Falls focused task force. It was very much focused on us. We can't necessarily, although we can provide input into something, say in Perth or Lanark, that is far outside of where we can actually do anything at this point. Next slide, please, Dave. So then from those meeting minutes and terms of references, again, the following deliverables at that point were there was some research that was going to be done around the effective models of affordable housing, the best practice strategies with other areas. So again, using references. There was going to be a review of the federal government's national housing strategy and some of the opportunities through the National Housing Co-Investment Fund, and a general review of the provincial government's long-term affordable housing strategy and what was happening there. I believe, if my memory serves me correctly, at that point in time, there was discussion, there was some, again, this is pre-COVID, there was talk about new funding coming available for some of these strategies as well. And I'm not sure exactly if they actually ever came to fruition or not. There was also a requirement to identify or action policies to engage the public as per the scope statement. So again, looking for that lived experience, looking for people's input through the population and a good cross section of it, not just in one particular area. Looking at some of the enablers and inhibitors in the current bylaws, policies, and procedures related to increasing access to housing. So for example, if there's things that would assist some of the developers to move forward, and I think off the top of my head, some of the examples would be things like number of parking spots per building or something like that. I think that's some of the agreements some of the examples. Potential partners and partnership strategies within the government or within other industries. There was going to be some review of identifying vacant development lands within the municipality, including some of the investigation, Carl, correct me if I'm wrong, of what's labeled the brown areas, perhaps? Is that
brownfields?
Yeah, brownfields, like reclaimed land, basically. Recognizing, of course, that Smith Falls is growing within its boundary and starting to bump its head on the boundaries that exist. Identifying some of the strategies to promote the conversion of non-residential or residential buildings for the use of affordable housing. So are there other buildings out there that could be converted over? And then from that, the last deliverable, of course, at that point in time was more around the strategic portion of it, was to propose planning policy approaches, anything that needed to be looked at, maybe from a zoning or policies within the municipality's official plan, which I believe was coming up for review. Potentially any of those policy gaps, which would align with the current priorities of the municipality. So where the official plan may have been focused over here 5 years ago, now the government's priority is now over on the housing side. So we just wanted to identify some of those gaps. And then at that point, the goal was to present this final strategy and proposal to council no later than the end of second quarter 2020. And of course, I think, COVID kind of came in and pushed a bunch of that around a little bit. So next, please, Dave. So out of all of that, we had came up with a couple other things. We wanted to create a timeline around the deliverables and owners and update that at least weekly. The challenge, of course, with timeline and deliverables is that it's always around ownership. And building a timeline is great, but if you don't have somebody that's actually owning the action you're trying to get done by, say, October 1st, if nobody owns it, it's not going to necessarily get done because there's always a million priorities focused on everything. When we're looking at root cause, we want to make sure that sometimes, we'll mistake the effect or symptom as a result of the cause. And we want to really make sure we get down into the root causes of the different issues and items. And there are different tools, and I wasn't going into the explanation, but there are different tools to dig into root causes at that point. And we did use some of these through our discussions and through our brainstorming sessions. Root cause is only typically as good as the project scope. And the reason we want to really make sure that we have a tight scope is so that we're really going into what is the issue we're trying to resolve, not just loosely saying, we're going to fix world hunger. We're going to fix any of these type of things. It gets very difficult to try to do that. So we have to be very clear on what it is we're trying to resolve. Otherwise, it just gets too big for most of us. So then, with that, Dave, if you wouldn't mind going over to the second PowerPoint deck, which I think is just titled Slide 2, even though there are 2 slides. So from that, we spun into a couple of working groups, and we came up with a number of different ideas and areas. The goal was not to necessarily problem solve at the point in time. The goal was more just to come up with areas or ideas that we thought could either A, be quick hits. So, if there's something we could make a big difference right now with minimal effort, then hey, let's go in and let's get it done. The other thing was just ideas that, we would want to investigate or look further into. It's not saying that all of these items were necessarily going to make it into the official project plan or even some of the actual tasks that were presented to the town council on behalf of the Housing Task Committee. So, for example, within each category, each list of items were grouped into categories. So, for example, the top, there was a category for development, construction, and ownership. And from a developer's perspective, obviously, this is coming in from, when we had developers representing on our team, there was talks about construction costs. Obviously, that one hasn't gone away. The development process, there was discussions around lack of incentives, costs for landlords to own, right size spaces, locations, and disability access. There was discussions around policies around, for lack of a better term at that point in time, just some of the slumlords or bylaw areas in the necessary policies and how they were being handled, and were they contributing to affordable housing or working against affordable housing. There was the community wellness and awareness, so discussions around community engagement, community education. If people are talking about the not in my backyard principle, helping understand some of that and explaining, making sure that everybody understands what affordable housing truly is, what it does, how it contributes. There's rights around and for the tenants. There was and just generally working around stereotypes. So again, there was focusing on the education, the awareness, and tasks to improve the community understanding. There was discussions around access and support. So, for example, spousal loss and the elderly in particular, but also around support for keeping people in their existing homes so that they're not displaced. How do we help somebody who is aging or is wants to have their own home but is unable to do it by themselves? What are the programs that are out there? Then there was the supply and demand discussions. So lack of rentals, too high of rent because of market demand increases. And some of this information, of course, was coming from our real estate angle and their representation. So, of course, we know the supply and demand remains an issue. We know that there's extremely low vacancy rates. And that's all symptoms of availability and can be impacted by, improving the number of affordable units in the market. So we may take a look at that as more of a symptomatic than the actual issue itself. The issue is availability. The issue is not high rent. High rent is an issue, don't get me wrong, but what I'm saying is it's high rent because there's not enough houses that are out there per se. Other projects that we were looking at were things like the ACE scores and social determinants. And again, that was tied to another project that we didn't want to lose sight of at the time, but that is something to discuss at another point, another place. And there was potentially that ties into some of the community involvement and understanding of some of the issues that are out there. Other projects that were other areas that we talked about were, vulnerable addiction and mental health issues, from a homeless perspective. And again, that was flagged as a boiling the ocean issue, probably something that we recognize as part of this team. However, we can't necessarily address that. There are other groups, there are other professionals that are currently working those particular areas, and we'll continue to support those. And then other areas such as loss of income, employment, credit, available land, number of dependent children. So if somebody has a large family and they can't find anything that suits their family, insufficient funding, shared environment aversion, changing demographics, gentrification, and for-profit interests, all deemed out of scope for this particular team because it was just too large of an issue. Well, there's a few comments as well that came from the particular discussions that happened, and what was, was again reaffirming that we need to have a lived experience session where people that are experiencing this now need to make sure that their voice is being heard through this team to the public and to the council. There was questions about whether or not we could look at rooming houses and some of the policies around that. There was questions about some of whether or not CIP projects could be included in this. There was a reference to supporting both landlords and tenants and potentially having some access to the community support workers, which are available at Rideau Community Health Services when there are requirements. There was note about eviction occurring without due notice or without the legal ability to do so. And from that, there was the discussion about making sure that everybody has an understanding and there's education around tenant rights and things like that. And then there was the discussion about just general rent circles. You can't afford to move somewhere else. The landlord's aware of that and doesn't fix some of the issues, making the house eventually unlivable in. Next slide, please, Dave. So from that, we boiled it down to approximately 3 areas that we felt we could potentially focus on. And these were areas that were coming in. So I just want to go back one more time, guys, and reaffirm that this last slide that you're looking at now was actually developed the same day that the WHO declared the pandemic. I remember literally standing there as Kelly got the text saying the pandemic's been called and stuff like that. So some of these things may be still valid. Some of them could be larger. Some of them may not be relevant anymore at all. And I think that's what this new team can do, is help kind of review some of this and just, maybe recalibrate exactly where we are today and what's happening. But what we had looked at was kind of the 3 key areas that we felt the team could work on and propose some particular issues to town council to review. And of that, there was the policy. So looking at proposing a bylaw review on minimum unit size, zoning bylaw revisions, zoning some of the brown field that was safe to do so to a residential, which would open up some more land within Smith Falls, using some of that reclaimed land or see if there was some land that could be donated to affordable housing. Then there was the density, the population density policies, sidewalk policies, parking regulations, things like that, which could all be looked at. What there was also a proposal around was, at the time, was adopting a position or strategy on some of the Airbnbs, the housing first strategy, rules around the length of time unit stays classified as affordable. So if I am a developer and I build a brand new building in Smith Falls and I'm like, I'll put 3 affordable units into it, and the tenants leave within the first year, and then all of a sudden there's no affordable units in the second year, then that's the type of thing there was going to be discussion on. And, looking at some of the dollars for parks request land that is used towards affordable housing. One of the comments that came back from the team after that was, what is the long-term strategy to ensure any work completed is maintained? Will there be an ongoing committee around this? So who is going to follow up on this in 10 years to make sure that we actually achieved some of what we wanted to achieve. And then, be careful around code enforcement and how it's done. And again, it's one thing to make a policy change or implement a code. It's another thing to enforce it. So I think that's the discussion as well. That's probably ongoing today. The next one was on the development side of things, so construction and ownership. And then there was talking about, how CIP options for affordable housing could be implemented and whether or not there were tax abatements that could be made to entice developers to build more units or places for that. There was discussions, again, these are just ideas. They were not necessarily ever meant to specifically be written in stone. Reducing building permit fees for affordable housing, reducing planning fees. Is there a donation of municipal land for affordable housing? Reducing some of the required parking spaces, ensuring that processes and priorities are aligned across municipal desks. So ideally, you want to just make sure that, if you're making a policy change, that it goes across the spectrum so that everybody's walking to the beat of the same drum, as opposed to, going through 3 desks and then it gets held up because there's a lot of red tape or something over happening here. There was discussion to make sure that there's support for both owners and tenants. And that was through, and as an example, through groups like the Rideau Community Health Services. Some of the community support workers can provide assistance to tenants. There was discussions about having seminars for tenants and owners alike. And there was a general call out to resist ghetto style development, which is basically grouping a lot of affordable housing or lower income housing into specific areas that creates more issues long term. Recognition that each party comes to the table with its own objectives and needs is important and okay. I think that all of us have, this point was more that, everybody has a different goal, a different objective, and a different priority. And the challenge sometimes is that if we don't align all perfectly, it's easy to judge people. And I think that the point for that is that, coming to the table and finding that common ground to make things better, not perfect, but better, it really was the purpose of the development. The municipality, this was to Sean's point, was the municipality cannot directly reward or compensate a developer for doing some of these things. It has to be through proper processes and above all, a very clear and transparent means. And Smith Falls does not currently have development charges. The comment from that was, of course, we need to maintain, and I'm not going to touch that one. The community wellness and awareness. So the final one was, proposing the organization and execution of awareness and education teams that would have within its scope, but not limited to, the following. So this is about community outreach. This is about making sure that people truly understand that what affordable housing is and what it means and how it impacts. The mistake can often be made that affordable housing and low-income housing and all of these things are impacting only the people that are actually in the situation. And in fact, this is a much larger umbrella, and a lack of affordable housing isn't supposed to be just related to people, because it impacts all of us in the community. So general education and awareness forums, education on rights and obligations for tenants and landlords, skill developments for tenants. So that was tagged to Vicky, who was part of the team at that point in time. She had kind of put together a list of things that she felt would help tenants. Discussions around mental health awareness, lived experiences with tenants and landlords. So is there opportunities to bring tenants and landlords together to actually have discussions, meaningful depth discussions? community awareness and sensitivities. So again, working through that so that people understand that it isn't somebody else, it's all of us. Having developer open house on projects at places like the community center. Again, this is pre-COVID, so this is when you could have these open houses and people could ask questions and stuff like that, right? But of course, we're not quite there today, but there may be other options on that. Really making sure that we're using the media to its fullest to get the message out there. Well, this is what affordable housing is. This is what we want to do. This is our town's position. This is our community's position. This is, the professional positions. This is also, there's discussion about tying into a larger rebranding project of the town of Smith Falls. Smith Falls, has undergone a tremendous amount of change and growth over the last, few years, and it's continuing to evolve quickly. We need to be very clear on the message and statement on the objectives. So that boils back to the scope of items, because we need to make sure the message is out there. We need to make sure that people understand what it is we're working on. Again, we don't have the ability to cure world hunger, but we will make things better. Have the availability of Q&As, options for financial literacy training, partnering with high schools, trying to get into some of these classes at an earlier age to try to help with awareness and where all of us can help. Assisting some of the single families with spousal loss, isolation, sharing rooms, and programs to assist keeping people in their own houses. So this was kind of the last slide here was kind of the suggestions that were going to be proposed to town council in a report, I believe. And then from that, I believe it was going to be up to council to redirect and create another team, which it is possibly this team, to begin reviewing. There may be some value in revisiting some of these to see if they're still valid or not. There's a number of issues that are obviously happening now that weren't happening last February or March when we had it. So any questions?
So thanks, Corey. Maybe Dave, you can pull the PowerPoint down so we can see the hands and faces. And thanks, Corey, for a great walkthrough, really the framework that led to the 17 recommendations that we are empowered to enact and ensure that they are all completed. And so this group obviously being the one which would be, again, coming out of those recommendations to follow through with that. So questions, first off, for Corey, Vicky?
Not a question, just a comment. I'm still here.
Yeah.
I didn't want to interrupt.
Great to have you back.
Hey, Vicky.
So as you can see from that, I'll go through questions in a moment, from that framework, there is a very broad scope of housing issues and the root causes that lead to those housing challenges. And if you look at the recommendations that we are working with right now, primarily focus on the development of affordable housing units and to ensure that happens in a variety of methods. So the one question for the group is, do we ask council to go beyond that scope and to say we need to look at some of the other issues that are facing the people of our community? So at that, I'll open it up for any further questions or comments to Corey.
I just have one comment just on that last slide, Corey, that you have. I just think something I would be mindful as to how we word things. I'm not sure that the use of ghetto style development would be a word I would use. I would use just a term such as not trying to segregate or fixate affordable style housing in certain areas. I would cautious the use of that word.
Fair comment, Lucy. Thank you.
Agreed.
Others, I'm not sure. Jeff?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Corey. Lots of good work there. And my question has to do with that document versus the 17 recommendations. So are you identifying things beyond the 17 that are in your document that maybe we should be amending our 17 to include some things that are in your report that aren't?
Well, that's a good question. I think that this document was a prelude to the 17 recommendations that have come forward. So out of this particular area, it evolved. I think this document evolved into the 17 recommendations.
Okay.
I don't have them with me at the moment, but it may be worthwhile to take another look at it and just validate that whatever's on those 17 recommendations are in fact, enough. If they've covered out of this what this proposal was from the other team, I think you're okay. But again, 17 recommendations that's quite a bit. So I think that's a basket full of work for sure. So.
Okay, yeah, I think we're going to prioritize those 17 today. And once we get our feet wet and start working, it's nice to have your document and our 17 recommendations because we are dealing with an ocean. As you say, it's easy to drown. So we'll have to be focused on the work at hand and do it very methodically, step by step.
Agreed.
I think that document, oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Vicki, and then Lindsay.
Just to note, for the financial literacy part, I believe I might be speaking out of term, but it might be boiling the ocean per se, because in my lived experience, you can only manage your money so much, right? If your rent's a certain amount, it's a certain amount. If it's over 30% of your income, then it's unaffordable, right? Like you can go to as many money classes as possible, but learning how to manage it better, unless you have another option, is just boiling the ocean, in my opinion.
Lindsay?
Definitely.
I think the document was really well done in terms of highlighting how, we have to be mindful of the whole boiling the ocean. The 17 recommendations are pretty, I feel, point clear in terms of what we have to assess. And I think kind of reminding ourselves on boiling the ocean and that, not getting too far out in our discussions when we look to tackle them. So I just really thought that was well done.
Thank you. And I guess when Linda's out on hopefully around 2:00, she will add more context about some of the issues that many tenants are facing today. And one thing's become even more, I guess, profoundly common over the last year or so is a number of people who have nowhere to go and are living in a hotel on a temporary basis. Pre-COVID, the county would have about funding for 3 days, 3 nights stay in a hotel for someone who was homeless. Thanks to the social service relief funding that came as a result of COVID, people have been in there much longer. Doesn't mean that's the best place to be, but I think you'd rather be in a hotel, even if it's for several months, versus being nowhere else. That funding is stopping unless something changes at the provincial level. So the reality is we have a greater risk of more people having no options and having nowhere to go. And of course, a hotel is not affordable for a long-term stay. So there's greater risk in the community even today than there probably was when we started the task force a year and a half ago. Mm-hmm. So the challenges are more profound, and that's where I think whether there's a temptation, obviously, to go further to help ensure we're meeting all the needs of everyone in our community. And I think we have to try to determine, I guess to Lindsay's point, are we not going to, if we go too broad, are we missing the opportunity or the need to ensure we have the commitment to long-term affordable, sustainable housing, unless we have maybe a breakout group which goes a step further into homeless shelters and options for people who are at risk of homelessness. Vicki?
On that note, what happens to somebody after their nights in a hotel stay is up? Like what happens to them after the hotel's done?
Well, that's the issue, because really they are on their own. They're couch surfing, they're staying with family, staying with friends, they're doing whatever they possibly can to find shelter. But as we see in larger centers, if there isn't a place to shelter, they end up in tent cities. There's, I think, all the probabilities. Lindsay, you want to comment further?
Yeah, I just wanted to know if, do we have numbers of actually how many people right now are in the hotels, and what that number is likely to be once that funding stops? And like, again, to not, boil the ocean, I am wondering if we should try to do some sort of like urgency of trying to figure out where these people are going to go. And there is a very good example that happened in Ottawa. I think it's Cornerstone is a shelter for women. And they ended up doing an ad campaign, a GoFundMe, and basically said, by the end of June, 130 women will not have housing. And I think they've almost been able to address it all by just simply getting the awareness out there. And I think we've seen success as well with Courtney. If we communicate, what's going to happen, I think it's very evident that there's a lot of people within the town willing to help, and like maybe that is paying towards a GoFundMe to pay the hotels to keep more people. I'm very concerned about what's going to happen to these people that are currently in the hotels when that funding stops.
Yeah, my understanding, it's been through the last year or so about 30 rooms a night which are occupied. That's across the county, but I think majority are here. I know the Econo Lodge and Rogers are two, which have had a fair number of people there. I think the Econo Lodge has probably been on average maybe 15 different rooms occupied on a nightly basis. But Ellie, this is your wheelhouse. I return to you for some insights and guidance here. Oh, Ellie, you're speaking, you're on mute. We can see your face, we can see your hand up.
I'm so glad you said Ellie. I was like,
Ellie, Kelly. Oh, that gets confusing. Ellie, are you there? Welcome back to Ellie. Other thoughts and with regards to really scope. And Linda's going to speak as well about the lifting of evictions that happened, eviction notices as of June 2nd, and the risk of further evictions through a community. We know that supply is a huge issue. And we know that to Vicky's suggestion about tenants being well prepared to put themselves front and center and top of the list when it comes to a new unit. In reality, a unit becomes available and there's generally dozens of people who are applying for it, which means one gets it and obviously dozens of others are not getting it. So, I mean, the gist of what we're trying to accomplish here is to address supply and affordability. But of course, the question is, do we go deeper and broader?
if you don't mind, Mayor Panko, if I just go back to Lindsay's comment just for a second. One of the things that I'm realizing just in my day-to-day work is that we're actually kind of rich in resources in some ways, in that there are various agencies. So if we take the people who are living in hotels right now, victim services might be working over here to find some funds, and you know, the various agencies that are working at the same time to the same end. One of the things we might want to do is bring those people to the same conversation, so we're aware and we can do it together, which would probably be more fruitful.
Mm.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and just to add to that, Kelly, I mean, I think that that's a great idea. And, you know, I don't know if that's something we can do in a meeting here, but that would be something I'd be willing to commit time to spending to outside of these meetings to see if we can get those parties talking, and then, you know, providing this group an update with.
Well, quite often it's knowing where to go. And it's maybe one point, one phone number to contact, one agency to contact to know that you understand what's available to you and how you can get help. And for a lot of people, that's a mystery today. Ellie, is that you signing on?
Hi, yes, it's Ellie.
Okay. I saw you had your hand up earlier, and when we were talking about the homeless issue, obviously, well within your wheelhouse. We'd love to hear your feedback.
Yeah, apologies. I was having some connectivity issues, so I am now just on my phone. I just wanted to kind of talk about the fact that last year we did have people in the hotels, and I would say to the same extent, the only issue was we didn't have the funding for it. So, you know, we were having to have people leave after 3 nights, where I'm sure they would have stayed for, you know, a couple months, if not longer. Now, then what we're seeing is when people are leaving, I mean, we're seeing tent encampments all across Lanark County, Smith Falls, Perth, Carleton Place. So just to kind of comment on what is happening now or what is going to happen, I think we're just going to see more and more tent encampments as they're already, you know, popping up all over the place.
Now, Ellie, I know my understanding is Cornerstone doesn't believe shelters are a suitable option. What are the suggestions for, I guess, the most suitable options?
I mean, so for landing youth services, which is separate from the one I think it was Lindsay was speaking about earlier, the Cornerstone Landing Women's Shelter. So Cornerstone Landing Youth Services, which is out of Lanark County, we do housing first. So, you know, which has been shown to reduce homelessness, you know, have the most significant impact on reducing homelessness. But it looks at not so much we don't have housing. We're not a housing program. We're supporting people out of homelessness. And, you know, realistically, if somebody's living in a shelter, they're still homeless. But that's not actually solving the problem. I think the way we work at it, I mean, it's tough, right? Because we have been relying on the private market, which obviously is not really an option any longer. But you're looking at things like, I think Cornerstone Landing does, you know, when we look at our housing and our rent supplements, like we have, I can't remember the exact number, but over 20 units of housing, right? And that's looking at those rent supplements that we provide each month for youth. So I think that's always a good way to go, right? I mean, at the end of the day, we want to get people housed. People don't want to be living out of a hotel or out of a shelter.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Vicki?
What are the ramifications of having a tent in town?
Well, a couple of factors there, I guess. One, they're having people who have camped out temporarily on Parks Canada land. Mm-hmm. So if you're in the parks, you're in Parks Canada land. My understanding is Parks Canada will not permit that.
What about the town?
Well, the town, I would say it's gray. We don't have a policy that is for it. We don't have a policy which would prohibit it. I think there would be concerns regarding safety.
Of course.
And we would probably try to address that. It's not a situation we would want to see. But we understand it may be a situation that may emerge.
My fear is that if it's being addressed, would it be addressed by trying to find them a suitable spot, or would it just be by dismantling the tent like we've seen in Ottawa?
Well, I think our preference would be we would see the province and county, which county relying on provincial funding, continue to pay for people to stay in a hotel. We just know it's not sustainable.
Yeah, of course.
I mean, it has happened, but it's been fragile. When social service relief funding ran out earlier this year, there were evictions. People from the motel had to leave for March 1st, or some temporary stays until round 3 of funding came in to stay. But that funding is temporary due to the pandemic. So it's I think we're probably entering uncharted waters that we haven't faced before, and we don't have answers. And I think it's one reason why we're trying to discuss it here. Lindsay?
No, just an adjustment. But one comment to be is obviously the supply. I think this task force and what we're doing, or this committee, we have to make sure that we get that supply going. Otherwise, it's going to be, in fact, it's already bad. Every month that goes by, it gets worse. Every year that goes by, it gets worse. We have to get some sort of density created for the housing ASAP, or it's just going to get worse and worse.
So on that, Linda may be able to join us before long. Or Linda, are you there yet? No. Let's move into review and prioritization of the 17 recommendations, because this is a pretty key step. And we need to understand what is the most meaningful, what's the easiest, what's the most meaningful and easiest, and how we want to try to prioritize what we do here. So Dave, or Carrie, do you have the ability to put up the work plan and get one with Lindsay's comments?
Oh, I can bring that one up. Hold on, let me just filter through my email and get that. So keep talking, Mayor Panko.
Oh, okay. You said talk, don't sing, right?
No, don't sing.
Okay, thanks.
That was the last response, Carrie.
So Lindsay, thank you for digging deeply into the recommendations and adding your commentary. And for those of you who don't, maybe weren't here last week, or sorry, 2 weeks ago, Lindsay is a builder developer, has a project underway in town on Phillip Street. And it's a great looking development. There will be, Lindsay, you want to talk a little bit more about it, but accessible units?
Sure. Yeah, it's each building is a 6-unit building, and we move forward with putting an accessible unit in each building. I'm pretty sure Carl can correct me on this, but one of the requirements is we actually weren't required to provide accessible units if you stay under 6 units. I'm pretty sure if you go over 6 units in a development, you are then required to put in accessible units. As a development, we did seek relief. So we put in what we thought would be a fair exchange for some of those relief items. And when I say relief, that's when you talk about a lot that maybe isn't big enough on frontage or area. So we propose putting in accessible units. We also proposed making a percentage of the building also affordable. One of the many conversations we did have was, what's the measure of affordability? It's a very ambiguous thing. And I will say there's nothing really like forcing us on a clear benchmark what that affordability mark is. So we've said that we've committed to making them affordable. But those guidelines, again, for us are even hard to navigate as to what would be a great benchmark. But yeah, and then I am also involved in 2 other developments that are in the planning or soon to be planning stages, and they'll be very similar developments.
Great. Thanks, Lindsay. And I think it speaks to policy as it relates to affordability. And we have had 2 examples in other buildings where we have established policy that we could follow through with, utilize again. And of course, from an accessibility standpoint, Carl, you may want to chime in, but I'm not sure if it's part of our OP or zoning bylaw or something that we probably should be adding to our priorities here. Carl?
No, thank you. Thank you, Mayor. Yes, our current official plan contains high-level, broad policy supportive of accessible development within the broad context of creating an inclusive community for everybody. The zoning bylaws, as you noted, is old. It doesn't. It's adopted in 1994, and I think that's why you'll see a lot of the policies that we're looking at here are specifically zoning policies, but it is very silent on accessibility, on accessible parking spaces, on any other sort of accessible units. In advance of this meeting, we did reach out to the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing just to determine if there's any programs or policies or tools that a municipality may have to mandate accessible housing for council's consideration. And my colleague there is looking into that, consulting with his colleagues, and he'll report back to us if there is. I know the province is looking at affordable housing tools, but accessible housing tools, I'm not as aware of how that's been implemented as a planning tool above and beyond what's required through the building code. But certainly I appreciate the work that Lindsay and her team have done with respect to going above and beyond to look at affordable and accessible housing. I know that's been welcomed by the Planning Advisory Committee when accessible units are proposed as part of development.
Thanks, Carl. And I think it's something we should keep on our radar. We'll look forward to the feedback and address it again at an upcoming meeting. Okay. Carrie, an email come in from Linda.
Did one come in? I haven't seen it. Can you see the screen that I shared, everyone, with Lindsay's comments? Okay.
Okay. So sorry, Linda.
Oh, Linda won't be able to make it.
Won't be able to make it. Yeah.
So I'll schedule her for our next meeting.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so let's go through here, starting with, and Carl, I'll let you take over here, and you drafted this document, talk about the zoning changes, and then Lindsay's comments as well as we go through the different steps.
Sure, thank you, and certainly I appreciate Jeff and Lindsay on this committee, as a lot of the items on these recommendations are familiar to both of them, because we've sort of wrestled with them and looked at them for on various projects. So just as an update to this group here, Council has awarded the contract for the zoning bylaw review to WSP Canada. They're a large consulting, planning and engineering consulting firm. They've had experience dealing with they've done a number of zoning reviews in comparable sized municipalities throughout Canada and also Eastern Ontario in the last number of years. We'll be having a startup meeting with them next week, and certainly one thing I'll be advising them is our priority and our focus on getting these items checked off as quickly as possible. Of course, the zoning review is a massive undertaking that covers a lot of ground above and beyond housing, but certainly housing is critical. So as far as the priorities, in this case, all of the zoning ones, that's sort of what we've identified with this group, that these are high priorities. The zoning review we're expecting to take overall close to a year, and that's not unusual for a project of that magnitude, just because issues do come up. There have been sometimes there's a particular planning issue, perhaps not related to housing at all, that sort of captures the public imagination and requires a lot of additional work. But one thing we will be discussing with our consultants on this is if there's any way that we can break this out and look at doing some housing, working in some housing policy first, so we can get that in place and fold it into a future zoning bylaw. So should I? I'll just look for the chair and the committee's direction. Do we want to go through each of these recommendations, or do we want to?
Yeah, I think some we'll spend more time at. Some we can go through fairly quickly, but like speaking to the need for parking and Lindsay's comments, I guess the rationale behind where our zoning bylaw sits today, the requirement for 1.25, and the difference that is potentially up for consideration.
Yes, and if I may, that's one planning issue that has come up more than probably the one that I've seen the most often coming up, and the parking is perceived as a barrier to getting the sort of density that would be required to make development economically viable. And a lot of municipalities are reducing or eliminating offsite parking requirements. The challenge we have is we don't have transit. And ultimately, if we're going to be reducing parking, say below 1, we'd have to look at creating some way or building in the infrastructure to get people to grocery stores, get people to services. And actually, we're working on that actually through the active transportation plan that's getting launched as well. But ultimately, that is, I think we will be working with our consultants, especially in the downtown core, to identify if there's a possibility to reduce the parking requirements, especially where there's the ability to walk places. Somebody can always get a minor variance or a zoning amendment on parking, but any planning application is potentially a barrier. As there is a time, there is a cost, there's always the potential for an appeal or some sort of unexpected surprise on a planning application. So that's parking. I think that's a very important, very probably the number one recommendation that we're looking at here.
And to Lindsay's comments, I mean that the higher parking requirement reduces density in all probability. So if we reduce the parking requirements per unit, we have a greater probability of having more units per development. So any thoughts on this before we move ahead? And I guess I don't have all your faces on my screen, to speak up if you have something to add. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was thinking, I mean, I really liked having this sent to us, and I read through it a couple of times, and I appreciate and agreed with much of it. And I'm thinking if we could, when we go through this, rate them, because I mean, to me, this is an easy one, a no-brainer. I mean, why can't we do this? But some of them are going to be harder, and some of them are going to be just not practical, and there's a lot of differences. But I think it would be helpful to prioritize, when we could do them, how we could do them, and the ones that are going to be easy to incorporate.
So, Carl, to that, I mean, we're redrafting our zoning bylaw, which would take a year. We don't want to wait a year to bring these policy changes into action. So, would this simply be an amendment to our zoning bylaw? To our current zoning bylaw to reduce the parking requirements to 1 on developments that have a certain density of affordable units. Is that a fair statement?
Yes. So, Mr. Chair, yes, our zoning bylaw remains in effect until it's adopted. So we can continue to process, if we get a rezoning application, we continue to process amendments to the existing bylaw, either as development applications or as council initiated projects. So one thing I'll explore with our consultants is if we can break out some of the high priority housing related policies and see if there's a way to get those done first, and see if we can kind of create some placeholder content within our zoning bylaw to adopt what we deem as particularly urgent. And I'll approach that with the team from WSP when we meet with them next week.
I just have one thing to add to that, if that's okay. Just speaking to Lorraine's point as well, I think as a group, we are all on the same page that the parking should be reduced per unit. And I think even at minimum, if we all want to vote on that now and say, yes, we agree it should be lowered, we've kind of tackled answering at least one of these. And my second thing would be is Carl moral question to you. If this committee wrote a letter saying we approve and support reducing the parking requirement down to 1 unit and send that to council, will that be helpful for council when they receive more minor variances asking for that relief? Like, is that something that we should just do right away so that council knows that we're supporting it as they've tasked us to review this issue?
Yeah, I think as long as we build some proper framework around it. In other words, it may not be suitable for all developments, especially larger ones where people may own 2 vehicles per unit in some cases. But I think we need some parameters. But Carl, you can hopefully add some context here.
Yes,
Kelly, sorry.
Sorry, you close on that one, Carl. I'm sorry.
Okay, sorry. The consultants we've retained they have a lot of experience working with parking questions in other municipalities. We discussed that when we interviewed them before earlier on in the process. So I would certainly look to them for advice and guidance on what would be an appropriate policy that we can look at. As indicated, a one-size-fits-all policy is challenging, given that obviously the town is not all the same. There's certain areas, certain contexts, certain forms of development where we might need parking. From my perspective, I'm not interested. I want to minimize the amount of hardened surfaces we're creating, especially if it's on unused hardened surfaces. But the direction on expediting certain zoning aspects ultimately would need to come from council. So if the task force were to create a resolution or some motion of support that then gets passed on to council, then that's I think that would be a great procedural step to expedite this conversation.
Kelly?
This is maybe, I'm just pulling it back just a little bit as far as general prioritization. Forgive me if I'm simple-minded here. It seems to me there's an opportunity to reconcile the work we did that Corey presented on with these recommendations, and because some of that prioritization work has been done. I know we're a new group and it's different, but some of that intel could be used now and save us a little time, or am I mixing things up?
I think the work that we did with Corey before, I think, has helped lead to these 17 recommendations. But I think we probably still need to prioritize here as to what can be is fairly easy to enact, the most meaningful, and how do we find the most meaningful and the easiest, I guess. And I look to Carl primarily for guidance here, understanding his role as planner and what would be required to actually make any of these changes into policy.
Just on that note, as a renter, and I'm currently renting my parking spot off of a business owner, I just fear that, just to understand, is there going to be a minimum at least 1 parking spot per unit?
Carl, you want to answer that? Oh, I think Carl's frozen. Yes, I believe we would not go lower than 1 per unit.
Okay, then that's fine.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, again, I think Carl's frozen here. So I think based on Carl's comments, this is something he can dig deeper into, see what's required, provide some context, and bring that back at our next meeting where we will look for probably a resolution of a recommendation to council to make a change in the zoning bylaw to accommodate this. Statement? Okay, Dave, can you scroll down? Number 2. Oh, sorry. So secondary units. Hello?
No, sorry, that was me, Mayor Panko. I just wanted to know if you were moving on to secondary dwellings.
Yes. Okay. So this is one where the province has brought in regulations that would lead to the development of secondary units. So it's been mandated. And I think, I don't know if Carl's still here or if Carl's coming back. It's a matter of question of how. And the other question I would like us to consider is, should we utilize a affordable housing community improvement plan to potentially provide incentives to homeowners to add secondary units to their dwellings? So, Carl, I guess you faded off for a moment, you're back. So the secondary unit, so I'll pass it back to you.
Yeah. No, I apologize. Unfortunately, I missed a little bit of the conversation there. As far as the secondary units go, the Planning Act actually requires municipalities to have policies that allow for affordable or allow for secondary units within an existing dwelling, and also as sort of an attached or detached unit, like a coach house or tiny house or whatever you want to call it. So that's actually that aspect of the zoning is actually something that we would be updating to comply with provincial policies. So we have to do that. What the municipality does have the authority to do is certainly regulate it within the context of looking at compatibility. So establishing maximum sizes, setback requirements, obviously looking at servicing to make sure that they are appropriate. But there's a huge amount of opportunity there to create, with a probably minimal impact on the existing neighborhood fabric, create that sort of housing. As far as the process to amend the zoning bylaw, the Planning Act does allow the municipality to initiate that. So we would simply look for direction from council to do that. We'd still have to go through the normal process in terms of giving notice, holding a public meeting, passing a bylaw with an appeal period. But an application a zoning amendment can be initiated by the municipality. It doesn't need to be initiated by a developer. So I may have missed another question that came in there, Mr. Chair. Were there any other questions that unfortunately I had cut off through the internet connection? Yeah.
Well, I guess there's a couple things. One, it's in the Act now. Is there a need for us to wait for our new zoning bylaw to bring this in, or can we make those amendments now? And secondly, I know this is a longer term thing, so it'll take some time to put together, but accommodations within our community improvement plan, affordable housing community improvement plan, to provide incentives that could encourage the development of secondary units. Yeah, go ahead, Carl.
So as far as the community improvement plan, that would be before we can adopt a new community improvement plan, we need to undertake a study that would sort of assess the overall issues and propose a number of recommendations that ultimately would be implemented in binding policy. And I think there's a lot of ways we can do that. We can look at, say, tax. And the neat thing is, a handful of municipalities have adopted affordable housing CIPs, and really they look at whatever's a priority for the municipality. And I've seen situations where these are simply focusing on loans and other tools to help people do this within their own homes, create affordable housing, or also as sort of tax abatements for larger projects. And there's a number of different streams and a number of different programs that we can look at depending on where we feel we get the most bang for the limited municipal funds we have. We don't have anything in this year's budget to accommodate a CIP, an affordable housing CIP, but that's absolutely something that we can look at in the as we go through the budget process for 2022.
Okay. So let's park the second part because that is a topic, a recommendation we will hit as we move through here. But to the group, does it make sense for us to request council move ahead with the development of with the amendments to our bylaw, zoning bylaw, to accommodate secondary units as per the Provincial Planning Act now? Is that a fair statement, Carl?
Yes, certainly that's a motion that can be provided to council. I would be reviewing that with our zoning consultants. Ultimately, their plan involves a pretty substantial and robust public consultation, which would certainly look at housing, but other things. So I'd want to, if we do a separate parallel expedited process, I'd want to review it with them to ensure that we're harmonizing the process as best as possible, so we can get everything done as quickly as we can.
Okay. Any further comments on number 2 here? Or do we have agreement that we believe this is a priority that should be escalated?
Yeah. Just one comment.
Yeah, Lindsay.
I think there's information that would be very easily to be able to be put together that can be sent out to the community who own detached homes, what they are allowed to do. Because Carl, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you do own a detached home under certain zones and with certain current provisions, you are allowed to add an income suite or secondary dwelling already. And I think if we provide some information as to, who could go ahead with this already, that helps us tackle the more immediate supply issue as well. There are current homes in the town that would be approved for a building permit already. And I think we need to help identify those places.
Yeah, great point, Lindsay. And especially even from affordability to a homeowner, when home prices are rising, the ability to have a secondary unit and have some rental income to help support your overall cost of ownership.
I totally agree with that, Lindsay. I think that's a good point. And I'd be curious, Carl, if there's another community that we can steal their policies. Like there must be someone somewhere that's further down the pike on this one that we can look at it. I think, as Lindsay said, people need to know what they can and can't do, and if they see that, oh, I can do this, they'll consider it. But if they're kind of they're up against a wall in terms of what they can't do, then I'm not going to bother. But if we have some provision so that people know what's available to them and what they're allowed to do, and like I said, I'm sure there's another community that we can lean on just to get their policies in terms of where they're at if they're further down the road.
Yeah, Jeff, actually there is a guide from Grant County, one example, secondary suites. Mm-hmm. So I think that's something that we can take advantage of, as you say, of what's been done elsewhere, and maybe create some promotional materials, some literature.
I can. There's material that Ottawa has issued for coach houses that it's a very reader-friendly description as to a basic homeowner who has no knowledge of development, how they go about it. I'll send that to the group because I think if we made information similar to not just the coach houses, but also just creating an income suite, it's very reader-friendly on how you go about that process and also where to go for further information.
Excellent. So I'll ask for a motion that we request council accelerate the development of required changes to accommodate further secondary suites and to develop a promotional plan to educate and inform the community on the ease and methods of creating a secondary suite to their current residents. Can someone move that, please? Jeff, seconded by Lindsay. All in favor? Great. Okay, thank you. That's carried. So we've got one checked off the list. Moving down to number 3. Dave, you can scroll, please. Go ahead, Carl.
So this is another zoning related recommendation. We do have our zoning bylaw does establish minimum dwelling unit sizes for various forms of housing. We have a one minimum for a single. We have minimums for apartments depending if they're bachelor, 1, 2, or 3 bedrooms. But what it does specifically exclude based on these minimums is the notion of, say, a tiny home or something like that, something smaller than that. Somebody can always apply for a minor variance, but there's that process. So what this recommendation involves us having a look at these numbers and seeing if it would make sense to or be desirable to reduce these and ultimately create a higher density yield and hopefully a more affordable housing stock and smaller units. So I think that would be a very helpful and desirable thing to look at in either all zones or just some zones.
So looking for feedback as to this is something that should we wait and let it be part of our zoning bylaw review and future zoning bylaw, or is it something that we should be potentially accelerating now?
I don't think we should touch it at all. I completely agree with Lindsay's comment, and it was kind of what I was trying to address the last year when we brought this up. I was living in a apartment that was under the minimum square footage, and it was not anywhere near affordable. So I don't think that lowering the square footage would mean affordability. It just allows developers to cram in more units at the same price.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Vicki. Further comments? Lindsay, do you want to elaborate a little bit more from a developer standpoint?
Sure. Yes. So developers love it when there's like very small minimums because they can obviously add in more revenue. But for like what I develop both in Ottawa and Smiths Falls. So I see two sides of the coin. And there are people who can live in a 250 square foot place in Ottawa because they come out of their building. There's a Whole Foods, there's a Loblaws, there's a gym, their office is just down the street. But my points here are not only based off of just what I'm seeing, but I also read the survey. And that survey that was conducted that Carrie sent out before our first meeting, I mean, about 40% of the respondents owned homes. So I kind of excluded 40% of the comments because they obviously have a house. But of the people who didn't own, the majority of them were 2+ occupants. So reducing the minimum requirements achieves nothing, I don't think, for the town. As well, if someone is in a wheelchair or has mobility issues, they're basically going to have a kitchen and a bathroom, and that's it, in order to meet the minimum space requirements for accessibility. I only see one benefit, which would be if we created a smaller minimum simply for secondary units, so a basement. If the minimum requirement doesn't allow people to have a secondary unit in a basement or in a coach house, I see a great use for it there. I don't see a great use for it anywhere else, for Smiths Falls.
Thank you. Jeff, Courtney, go ahead.
Okay, so I was going to say basically like what Lindsay said, as far as making units smaller, like accessibility, like why is that just completely makes it less and less accessible? Because the place that I was just in, like it was, I think, just over like the minimum, and it was very, very hard for me to get around. Like the way the bathroom was set up, because it was so small, there was like hardly any room to get around. So the smaller the unit is, the less wiggle room you have to maneuver a wheelchair around. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So making it smaller doesn't really help accessibility.
Thank you. Jeff, from a not-for-profit standpoint, I guess, so Jeff works for Cambridge Community Support, and they're a lot of things. Jeff's here because they're a not-for-profit housing provider. They own a large number of units. Would there be merit to a not-for-profit building a new development, affordable housing development, to have smaller unit sizes, or would this not be a factor?
You know, the cost of construction is always the biggest concern, right? And we were on a call this morning, and what we're trying to build in Smith Falls is a building that has a lot of one-bedroom apartments, because if you look at the county wait list, that's the highest demand right now. Is there's a need for one bedrooms. That said, going too small, you know, you got to have that space. It's a long, cold winter in Canada, so you've got to have some space for those one bedrooms. But like any developer, the smaller the unit size, the more units you can build. For a nonprofit, that's more people we can serve. We don't look at it from a profit motive. Like Lindsay's saying, condos in Toronto and Ottawa, they're trying to make them smaller and smaller because they can make millions. We're trying to help people have decent lives. So we're not we don't want to go too small, because that can affect the mental health of the people that are in the unit. So it's really important to have a balance. And as you know, it's difficult to build public housing just because of the cost. So we really look at having units. You know, you've talked a little bit about accessibility. What we were trying to do, or what we are trying to do with the 28 units in Smith Falls, is have units that are actually visitable. That's another term that the World Health Organization has talked about. And it's fine if you live in a building and you are in a wheelchair and you have an accessible unit. It's not so great if you can't go and visit your neighbors because their units are not. So we're looking at that building with wide enough doors. Not all, you know, there was only going to be one or two units that may have lowered countertops, that kind of stuff, for full accessibility. So when you're looking at accessibility, you have to look through the lens that it means different things to different people. And the more we can build a community that's accessible, you know, look at your sidewalks. All of the corners now have accessible curbs, that kind of stuff. So we should be looking at that when we're talking about buildings as well. That it's one thing to put a roof over someone that's in a wheelchair. It's another thing to build a community that is accessible on different levels. So yeah, small is cheaper, but it doesn't always provide the quality of life that we're looking for. So
okay. Thanks, Jeff.
That helps.
The sense I get here is that this is not a top priority right now. It may not be a priority. And it can be handled as an exception to a zoning bylaw now. If, as an example, your development, Jeff, came forward and you wanted to do a handful of units that were 400 square feet. So I think we can park this one as being part of a regular zoning bylaw and move on to other items we believe are bigger priority. So number 4, please.
Could I jump back in?
Sorry.
Yeah.
Ellie here. Sorry. I can't raise my hand because I'm on the phone. I just wanted to touch on kind of how Lindsay suggested they're putting the, you know, smaller dwelling sizes in regards to the benefit of having that secondary unit. You know, I think we've got to look at, yes, it may not be as accessible, but I think, you know, when we're looking at working with affordable housing, I think all options should really be on the table, especially an option like this, which might, you know, won't take a whole lot of time to build, in the sense of, you know, that secondary unit in the basement, as Lindsay suggested. And I think, you know, when we're talking tiny homes, you know, from my experience, I'm seeing a lot of youth, like I work in the youth sector. So a lot of youth who would, you know, really benefit from having that extra support and just being in that secondary unit, or, you know, attached in a tiny home onto a parent's property, but they, you know, for different reasons may not be able to stay within that home. So I would like to see it included in regards to, you know, the smaller dwellings for secondary units still.
Okay. Great point, Ellie. Thank you. And Carl, I can't see you, but I'm sure you're somewhere listening. And
oh, I'm here.
Okay, just keep sliding back and forth here. Okay, great. That'll be, Carl will incorporate that into his feedback. Okay. Number 4, Go ahead, Carl.
Thank you. This is another potential planning tool that's available for us, and ultimately, when it comes to the current zoning lot size and lot frontage requirements that we have they're fairly significant, especially for single family dwellings. We require a minimum of over 5,000 square feet for a lot, and roughly 50 feet of frontage in the R1 zone, for instance, which ultimately the more density you can get on a lot, the more efficient your use of municipal, or the more density you can get along a road frontage, the more efficient the use of municipal services is. So one of the recommendations is to look at reducing minimum lot size, minimum lot frontages for certain kinds of developments on in residential lands to encourage increased density, which may decrease overall construction costs. Of course, whether that results in savings in affordability remains to be seen, but it is a recommendation that's intended to create, I guess, an additional planning tools to support an increased density.
Good. Comments here? Thoughts here?
I wrote mine, but I'll just make a few more comments. Basically, I think, Carl, what you'll be doing at WSP Canada, is that what they are, the planning consultants? Yeah. Because sometimes, like, putting a multi-unit building around single detached homes and that building having 12 units makes no sense. It might have a certain zone, but it just doesn't comply. So I actually forgot to attach it to the email. I just realized right now. But like in Ottawa, they have not only their R1, R2, R3 zones, but then they have a table of subsections. And those subsections will limit certain things within that zone for certain areas to kind of ensure that certain development isn't done broadly if you make, revisions to things on a broad perspective. So under R3, you could reduce minimum lots down to 20 under R3B, but under R3A, it stay at the 50. And that helps, control weird development patterns that could happen if you didn't do that. But I feel like that's something that WSP Canada and the town should really be trying to do, is versus just making one change to an R3, we should be trying to develop R3A through to, H, and having various different subsections that not only look at conformity on a building perspective, but also assesses the stormwater management capabilities to afford that type of density on the town services too.
Thanks, Lindsay. It's great insight. I guess the question becomes, is this something that we believe will make a bigger difference sooner, or something, it's a fairly complex item that would probably be applied on a property basis?
I think it's quite complex.
Yeah, so it should be probably part of our zoning bylaw review and implementation. Is that everyone in agreement? Okay. And Carl, obviously you have the feedback here from Lindsay to share with WSP.
Absolutely.
Okay. So number 5.
So this one is, at least from a procedural standpoint, a little bit of a longer term approach, because it would require an amendment to the official plan first. But shopping centers are, proximity to shopping centers and the various services, grocery stores and so on that are around them are one of the areas where we may be looking where increased density or perhaps reduced parking makes the most sense, as there'd be more services within walking distance. And we see in a lot of larger urban municipalities, shopping centers are sort of rezoning to accommodate mixed-use development on their peripheries around the roads or elsewhere on the site, just to maximize the utility and economics of their project. So again, this would require an amendment to the official plan, as there's no policy that allows residential development in their shopping center designations right now, but it is perhaps as a longer term initiative, something that would be helpful to look at from a number of different angles.
So Carl, based on the requirements here, I think it's something that we can, obviously a recommendation we want to consider further, but I think we can push it down the list from a priority standpoint. Agreement? Okay. So number 6, go ahead, Carl.
So investigate zoning changes to allow ground floor residential development in certain circumstances in the downtown core. This is an inquiry that these inquiries I receive quite frequently. We do have planning policies that require ground floor commercial development within most of our downtown core, and there's a lot of good reasons for that, and certainly encouraging a commercial stock, a commercial institutional stock that really creates that regional draw. We want to have that critical mass to support pedestrian friendly development. There's very good reasons for that. We do get a lot of inquiries, especially on sort of the fringe areas of the downtown core, areas that have historically been residential, looking to convert ground floor areas to residential, as well as also in some circumstances, depending on the property, they have the back of the building where we're getting inquiries to create ground floor residential. So that doesn't comply with zoning right now. And we'd have to look at a number of things such as amenity space. And I think that's important too. We want to make sure if we are creating residential units, we have the ability to also create a little bit of a space for them to have a barbecue, or we don't want the unit to be just surrounded by concrete. But there may be some flexibility worth looking into in zoning and looking at ground floor residential sort of at the back or the side of some units downtown that still retain that commercial streetscape, but give a little bit of flexibility to the rear. And that's something that we're not making. This recommendation isn't so detailed as to prescribe what that's going to look like, but at least create a little bit of a framework to consider that within the confines of what our official plan allows.
So Carl, this would be, obviously couldn't apply to all property. Well, I suppose it could apply to almost all properties in the downtown core, based on if there were sufficient opportunities in, let's say, the rear of a property. Is that a fair statement?
Yes. So Mr. Chair, sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, if we were to create policies to accommodate rear yard or sort of the back of building and residential, it wouldn't be available to every single unit. Certainly, some of the interior blocks, it might be harder to build that in, but it would certainly be available to some where they do have the space in the downtown core to accommodate those extra units. And again, we'd have to look at parking. Like I find in terms of limiting the number of units, I find in my experience, parking requirements have been the largest constraint in terms of limiting the number of units than any of these particular things. So we'd have to look at that comprehensively. But yes, to answer your question, I wouldn't. Creating this sort of flexibility wouldn't mean that it would be available to every property owner downtown. The geography of the sites may simply not allow it in some circumstances.
Okay. So my sense here is that this is something, again, that the zoning bylaw review and new zoning bylaw will address. And I'm not sure it's something we want to address sooner or prioritize ahead of others. So Lorraine?
No, I would just say it's not something that I'm in favor of. And I know right now our council is looking at the downtown historic center and looking at designating an area. And to me, the the last thing that those buildings would want to have would be apartments under them. I mean, we have very few left. And the last thing that I think in that area we need to do is to give those buildings to a residential need. And I'm not debating we have need, but in that particular area, I don't think it's the place to do it. There are some lovely upper floors. Many of our buildings have 3 or 4 stories with good apartments. I just don't think they should be on the commercial level. We have one already, remember, a few years ago, Sean, and it in my opinion, wasn't a success. I'm not in favor of it.
Everyone agree? We'll just defer this to the zoning bylaw review. Okay.
My landlord had made a statement to me saying that it would be a lot easier if he was allowed to have bottom floor apartments. He has ones already on the go, freshly renovated, just waiting for approval.
Is that Vicky?
Pardon?
Oh, sorry. Just trying to see that. Was that Vicky?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Sorry. You scrolled across my screen here to see. Thank you.
No problem.
Okay. Carl, pre-zoning for density. Again, if you feel this is something that would make sense to accelerate or something that should be part of the zoning bylaw review.
My recommendation to this committee is that it be part of the overall zoning review. I think there's certainly merit to sort of making it easier to develop higher density along the major transportation routes that we have right now. However, that would require a significant level of investigation as to what's an appropriate density, which roads are suitable, where is servicing suitable, and that may require more of a targeted and strategic implementation. So it may be something that where we look at different subzones, different roads that are suitable for this, and we'd have to look at that. We'd have to look at that on a very detailed basis, and I'd recommend that we look at that as part of the broader review rather than something that can be. I don't think it's something that can be done very quickly.
Okay. Any disagreement on that? I don't see any. Okay. Okay, town land policies, recommendation number 8. 8 and 9 really go hand in hand.
So I will defer this to Carrie, who'd best be able to speak to that.
Sure.
Okay.
To me, I mean, this is one that is, especially the land sale bylaw, it's kind of maybe the low hanging fruit. Like I have a bylaw done. Actually, Carl and I had worked on it maybe late 2020, but kind of have held on to it so that this committee would be able to review it and, have any updates or any say in it. The current municipal land sale bylaw and the one that we've reviewed and we've had, it's gone through our legal as well. It doesn't change much. There's still quite a bit of public notice required as well as, council discussing an open session. So it hasn't changed in that respect, but we have added some criteria for affordable housing in that bylaw. So what I'd be happy to circulate that because I think that is one that we could check off the list rather quickly. We could add it to our next agenda and review it, and it could come before council. So I think that's one that could be dealt with very swiftly. Okay. The publicize the listing of town-owned land. This is one I'm going to have to do a little bit of work on. I know our previous manager of economic development did have a listing. Mm-hmm. I don't know where that stands currently, but I do agree with the, that it should be a high priority. But I'll leave it up to the group whether, if we want to expand into private owned land or if we're just going to keep it to municipal. It might make it a bit harder to manage if it's privately owned land, but that's one that I am going to have to do a bit of digging on because I don't know where that stands now that Jen has left employment here. So like I said, the land sale bylaw, we can deal with that possibly at our next meeting if time permits. The next one, I'd be happy to try to get it for the next meeting, if not the meeting after that. But I know there is a listing of municipal lands in ECDEV somewhere, but it does not include private land. So If that's something the group feels that we should add to that list, that might take a little more time to put together.
Yeah, that I may have a list as well. But either way, we can come up with that list. And I guess it'd be appropriate to break out the properties that are have good potential for residential development, the right zoning in place today. And to Lindsay's point here, the second step of that could be utilizing an RFP process to actually, so rather than putting it out there for a sale of property, do we do an RFP based on the opportunity of a donation of land for an affordable housing development? Or do we even look further than that to the point where we actually have a model, we have a concept, we have drawings, we have something in mind, and then we go for an RFP. So I think based on Carrie's comments, if you can circulate that amended bylaw, and then over the next couple of weeks before that comes back, I'd like people to give further thought as to if we had land available, how do we best move forward to ensure that affordable housing lands on that property, and the steps it would take. And then Lindsay's provides some great framework here. Everyone get a chance to read that as we move forward. But the other thing would be, I'd like the group to consider, should we also be making recommendations to council that the town look to acquire property that could be suitable for affordable housing as well, in order to be able to follow through and ensure that development occurs there. So a few things I think to contemplate. So I think 8 and 9 we'll bring back at the next meeting, but I'd like to have a more robust discussion with it at that point. Is that fair, everybody? Okay. Dave, number 10.
Sorry, it's me, Sean, driving.
Oh, Carrie, number 10, sorry.
Hold on. Hold on, I've lost where we are here. Yeah. Number 10, property standards. Oh, this is a good one. Well,
go ahead, Carrie.
So our last property standards update was done in, I would love to say 2016, but I think it was 2014. So we do have a property standards and a yards bylaw. The property standards bylaw is more restrictive in the fact that we are mandated under legislation to have a property standards committee. So if a property owner gets an order on their property, they have the right to appeal that and go through the committee, which kind of holds up, fixing up the property. Our yards bylaw, in comparison, although it doesn't incorporate everything that property standards does, our yards bylaw does have a set fine provision, which allows the municipality to go in and fine a property owner. And I don't know about you, but my experience has said once if you're going to hit somebody in their pocketbook or their wallet, you seem to get more of a reaction from them. So I try to encourage our enforcement officers to use our yards bylaw when they can. Obviously, there's times where property standards we have to use the property standards bylaw, but there is time restrictions with it. There's, you issue an order and you have to give a time frame for it to be fixed. Another item that some people don't know is that if a property order isn't complied with and the town goes in to do the work, that gets paid for by the town, and then that goes on a property owner's taxes. So, some of that money can be recouped if the people pay their property taxes. Sometimes it's not recouped. So it's always a bit risky to do that. Luckily, it's not something we have to do all the time. The other item with property standards is many people feel that we need to be able to get more involved with the inside of people's homes. We're very limited on what we can do regarding inside of somebody's home unless we have knowledge or evidence, of deterioration of the structure, even with something like hoarding, if the fire department acknowledges or is able to go in and ensure that there's 2 ways out and that CO detectors and fire alarms are working, there's not much that we can do on that. You're very much on the line with human rights. So it is a line we have to walk, and it's one that we don't want to cross, is violating someone's human rights. But we can take a look at the property standards bylaw to see if we can up our game, for certain elements of the outside of people's properties. We do have a new enforcement officers in town council. We increased the budget, so now we have 2 bylaw enforcement officers. So we have 1 dedicated officer to parking, and the other who's dedicated to property standards, animal control, things of that item. So right now, I think we're kind of at the review stage of the property standards bylaw. And I'm happy to send our current bylaw out to everybody and would love comments. Lindsay, if you have any expertise or anything from other municipalities that may have, good bylaws. Keeping in mind, we only have 2 officers, so I don't have a whole staff of officers. But that is something that I'd like this group to review, before our mandate's up. I don't want to say it's a low priority, because I think property standards is quite important, not just to people who, are looking to move here and looking at Smiths Falls, but for the people who are living here already and own homes. So I don't want to say there's other things that are of higher priority, but I would, my personal opinion, I think this is kind of a medium priority that I think we should give our attention to.
Thanks, Carrie. I'll turn to questions in a moment. The one thing I guess I receive complaints from tenants every now and then who are facing what they believe are health issues: cockroaches, bed bugs, mold, things. And currently, our bylaw, doesn't give us the right to go in and inspect, obviously, but still provides very little teeth, I guess, when it comes to these issues. So one thing I would, I guess, from a tenant's rights perspective, I would believe they'd be able to go back to their landlord and fight for to get those issues resolved. But is there, aside from that, is this something that does exist in other property standards bylaws, or is that outside the scope of property bylaw?
My first response is that, and this is another line that Mayor Panko, and because you're involved in some of these, is we've tried to work with our health. There's nobody from the health unit on this call, is there? Okay, this is the cone of silence.
It's a public meeting.
So we have tried working with the health unit on these issues, and they have responded, but some of these issues that are deemed that, cockroaches, for instance, are deemed to be more of a, what's the word I'm looking for, Mayor Panko? An inconvenience, as opposed to it, violating somebody's health and safety, or a safety concern or a health concern. So, we have to keep in mind we have to walk that line between what the health unit deems as safe and what we can legally put in our property standards bylaw. And again, it's, right of entry. We don't always have right of entry to go into investigate these things. And I can't speak, I don't know what the health unit's right of entry is to examine some of these, but I'm certainly happy to do some more investigating. And we've developed a good relationship with the health unit since COVID. We've got some great contacts there. So I'm happy to work with them as well to see if there's anything we can do to give our bylaw a little more teeth, I guess, to see if we can add anything in that, and it may assist them as well.
Sure.
But right now, my first opinion is that might be a little out of the scope of a property standards bylaw. I would like to see that changed as well.
So considering our timing here, let's park this one. We know you're going to do further investigation. You'll share the bylaw, and this will come back.
I'd really like to add a comment.
Yeah, go ahead.
I feel like this is out of our scope. If we're not going to deal with mental health or any other issues like that, then hoarding can often fall under mental health, and it's kind of out of the scope and boiling the ocean unless, this is all just for a facade of the building. I mean, if we really want, this whole group is about putting people in houses, not about prettying up properties or anything like that. If we're going to focus on that, that's more of a council issue, in my opinion, not a task force issue.
Vicki, that's a great point. And Leonard County Mental Health does have a hoarding coalition.
Yeah.
And I know our fire department has worked with them when something of that nature comes up. But I really do appreciate that point.
Thank you.
Okay. Oh, okay, Kelly, thank you. Number 11, I want to have a good discussion on this because I believe it's one of the most meaningful policy developments that we can bring in to encourage developers to create affordable units. And I look for feedback on this. To Carl's point, there's no money in the 2021 budget for this. It's something that would take several months to develop, maybe close to a year. If we are building a development that currently falls within the zone of our current community improvement plan, which is basically our downtown and our shoulder areas, if someone comes forward wanting to do affordable housing in there, we can utilize the existing plan and maybe provide some relief and some tax abatement and cutting some fees. But if it's outside that area, we have no ability today to provide a developer with an incentive to provide affordable units. So I'd like to have some discussion on this. I know we're running out of time, but my thought is if we see incredible value in this, do we encourage council to look at accelerating the development of an affordable housing CIP, meaning we look towards utilizing reserves or a pre-budget approval for 2021 or somehow find the money. I don't know what it would cost. Maybe Carl has some idea of what this would cost, but I'm looking for feedback on how we should prioritize number 11.
I believe it should be high because it's going to take a while to implement.
Thank you. Others? Lorraine?
I think it should be a high priority too. And I think we've seen our CIP program work in another way for heritage. And I think it could work for this. And this is a greater need, in my opinion, right now. I mean, we need places for people to live. I mean, we're just talking about those people living in, Connell Lodge. That's just wrong. We've got to start looking at this in a bigger way and really moving forward with it. And I think this is one that might really help developers.
Lindsay, I'll put you on the spot as a developer. If you were doing a project and you had the opportunity to get some forms of relief, maybe including tax for affordable units, is that something which would compel you to do more affordable units?
One thing I do want to say is, I think Smiths Falls already does a really great thing that we could spread more information on, which is you do not charge development fees. And every time I speak to a developer from other towns about that or cities, they're shocked. People do not know that you do not charge development fees. And I think we need to get that information out there because that's already saving us. So in addition to that, of course, I think reducing property taxes for those who either keep the buildings or, a lot of the clients I work with are ones who then sell them eventually. It makes a huge impact on cash flow, which then allows them to make more units more affordable because everything's determined based off of that net income, which determines that cap, and that's their valuation models. So yes, but I actually think we could also maybe like when we talk about items 1, 2, and 3 about information, I think the town should really start advertising in places like Ottawa, like Kingston. Hey, come here, because you're the only town that does not charge development fees. And I know people who have looked at developing in Perth, for example, and they won't because it's expensive and they stay in Smiths Falls. So yes, tax breaks on property taxes would be great. I think if the town received funding that was more than just, the amounts for tax breaks, they should put it towards improving existing buildings or existing housing that already serves more affordable units because developers are already getting a good deal coming to Smiths Falls.
Thanks, Lindsay. Carl?
So early last year, I prepared a brief report sort of outlining what a community improvement, what a CIP application like this can look like and what it can do. So with the committee's permission, or with the committee's direction, I could update that and include some potential costing options, since there are other municipalities who've gone down this path before, and I could update that report and present it back to the committee to sort of further that discussion and perhaps help inform your decision as to whether you'd like to ask council to expedite this. Because as you mentioned, Mr. Chair, this is potentially the signature piece, the signature recommendation that can apply for that can work here. We've had a few situations where we've been able to get a few affordable units here and there using the existing planning tools we have, but not a significant amount. So I'll look for the committee's direction on that.
I think that sounds reasonable. We're planning to reconvene in 2 weeks, and Carl, if you could bring that back, I think we'll be prepared to address it fully at that time.
Can I make one comment here on that?
Yep.
So for number 11, it says we need to define what is meant by affordability, and to kind of figure out what like the majority needs for affordability, we kind of need to like figure out a happy medium for like, I don't know how to word this, like a happy medium for rent prices, like, because obviously there's going to be different groups of what people can afford. So we kind of want to find like a happy medium that's good for everyone. So we kind of need to like find out what people can afford to really find out what affordability is.
It's a really good point, because developers will say 80% of one's income is affordability, but I think affordability is determined by 30% of one's income. That's a really good point. Yeah,
and I guess I know the units we have 6 units being developed right now, which we have affordable housing. We have an affordable agreement on. Carl, you can speak to a little bit more detail, please. Within 2 developments that are happening now, but affordable in those units, I believe it's 70 or 80% of the market rent. And as you said, Courtney, that may not be affordable. Carl?
Yes, that's how affordability has been defined in those particular instances, which is pretty much consistent with how I've seen it defined elsewhere. But one thing, when we do look at that, when we do look at the CIP, then we can certainly look at those thresholds and see if there's some way to create sort of incentives or tools to encourage developers to offer lower rents. Again, we'd have to investigate that, but the 80% of the average market rent is what that's the threshold that I've usually seen with these sorts of things. And part of our challenge is even defining what the average market rent is. We don't have that information for Smith Falls as a locality. Larger urban areas can pull that data. So we either have to look at Lanark County as a whole, or look at some sort of system where we get an appraisal. But that's defining affordability, as you mentioned, is such a critical part of this, and I would think that the CIP, however we decide to develop it, would dig down and give us some direction on that.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Courtney and Carl, and we'll see that. Okay, Jeff?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that our project in Smith Falls at 44 Chambers Street falls within the existing downtown CIP, and getting that reprieve of tax money is really, really important to us. It will make a big difference in our case. We're always trying to provide as deep of affordability as possible, and when we can get this kind of benefit from a municipality, it just makes the business model that much more effective for public housing. So broadening the CIP across the town, I think, is a valuable project and something that we should be concentrating on. And I realize that you haven't budgeted for it this year, but like you said, Mayor Panko, if we can find ways to expedite this, I think it will make a big difference. And within that, you're going to have to define these different things, because affordability is described in different ways. And 80% of market rent is still pretty high. So
80% of high is still pretty high in many cases.
Yeah,
it's better, but
it's just not reachable for a large part of the population.
Yeah. Well, so again, that'll be a great discussion when it comes to forming our affordable housing CIP. So thank you everyone for their comments. We're running short on time here, but I think we're almost through, because there's a couple here I want to talk about. The residential development information guide. I think we can let's park that for the moment. Bring it back next week. I think we can provide some framework there. But tenant workshops and education, if we can focus on that for a moment. As you know, Linda Tranter from the Legal Clinic in Perth was a delegation today. She couldn't make it because she was dealing with tenant issues with the Landlord and Tenant Tribunal. She's very willing to do some information sessions. And one thing I've learned over the last few years is the number of tenants that have been inappropriately evicted or evicted without the proper process. And I still believe the most affordable home that someone is going to have is the one they're in now. And if we can ensure that everyone understands their rights and can stay when they have the right to stay, then we're making sure that they're not facing a critical housing crisis where they can't find a place and they can't afford a place they can find. So I really like to move this one forward, and I'd like to get some feedback with the rest of the group on how big a priority this is.
Massive priority.
Yes, immediate.
I think it's a really tough one, because that would have really helped me in my situation. Like, the more people that know, the better.
Yeah, everybody needs to know their rights, either a landlord or a tenant, especially tenants.
So method of engagement, what would people suggest?
I think we have to watch on who we get. I've been advocating for a 76-year-old landlord here in Elmont, and we reached out to the legal clinic in Perth that Linda runs, and their mandate is to advocate for tenants. They don't actually do work for landlords, and I think that we have a bit of a gap here. I know there's lots of discussion about the potential of tent cities and illegal evictions and all of this sort of stuff, but there's also really good landlords out there who have been working with the county. What we're hearing from the county is fewer and fewer of them want to take rent supplements because they're interested in getting higher rents. So we need to look at both sides and who would be the appropriate trainer from each perspective, because we want to keep those good landlords, because there are lots of them, all bad. And much like there aren't all bad tenants, but there are some that deserve to be evicted. So we have to be careful with this one.
It's like the same with landlords though. And if we're going to skirt on the legalities, really.
Yeah. So sorry, Vicki.
No, it's okay.
So I think information session that focuses on the law for landlords and tenants, I think would be informative for both. Yeah.
I've got one thing to add, maybe.
Sure.
I think it'd be great if we could provide resources to landlords where they can maybe access some funding to do upgrades. Sometimes, yes, a landlord may own a building and they may collect rent, but it doesn't mean that they, have a lot of cash. And so if we also gear them towards areas where they could try to, get property upgrade funding, so that they don't have to increase a tenant's rent, so that they can deal with exterminations for cockroaches and things like that. There is a misperception sometimes that landlords just rake in money, and not all do. Obviously they own an asset, But if we can also provide them with guidance on resources to make the living environments more well maintained, I think that would help too.
Thanks, Vicki. And to the point, there's a lot of landlords who may have good asset value in the properties they own, but still have low cash flow based on long-term tenants, and perhaps don't have the money to do the work that needs to be done. But so with this, I guess from an engagement standpoint, it's a little bit tough with COVID, but I suggest we could line up probably a couple different information sessions in a Zoom or webinar fashion or format. That at least as a good starting point. Does that seem reasonable? Do you think most people would have access to technology in order to be able to participate?
For the most part, maybe accept questions ahead of time, just in case, and have the event live streamed on all platforms like we do these.
Mm-hmm. And if we have the chat features generally with Zoom or other platforms, people could type their questions in.
Is there a limitation on how many people can attend a Zoom meeting?
There are, but I think maybe 100.
Okay.
I think roughly. There are other platforms that can go larger. Just what's manageable. So on that, I guess, is there a consensus that we need to make this a real priority and get this done soon? Then we'll work at putting it together. Okay. So scrolling down, we're almost there, I think, Carrie. Oh, sorry, 13.
Oh, yeah, the cost increment. What we can volunteer for that.
Okay, so 14. Yeah, we'll figure that out. Educational sessions, okay, and not-for-profits. I think we're already working on that. 16. We're already over time here. Yeah, and just with that, I think everyone understands, based on our first meeting, Leonard County Housing owns 279 units in town. They own all the social housing. Councillor Peter McKenna and myself are on the Community Services Committee there and Leonard County Housing Authority. But we have some involvement, and we're encouraging things at that end. To that point, the county is delving into an affordable housing analysis that hopefully will help guide its decision making going forward. It will help, I hope, accelerate implementation of their 10-year housing plan, which I think is strong recognition now that the needs are fairly broad across the county, of course, including Smith Falls. And I guess that's it. I see Jeff has had to sign off. We went well overboard. I appreciate everyone's time, commitment, and participation today. And any closing remarks before we sign off and plan to meet in 2 weeks? Okay. Thanks, everyone. And Courtney, good to see the Habs t-shirt. I think you're probably a happy girl this week.
Yeah.
Okay. Take care, everyone.
Bye, guys.
Bye.